So if we kick off with perhaps you, Jane.
Questions that I'd like to discuss or
Mm-hmm.
topics? Okay.
The
No, I hadn't
topic.
really thought of any questions. I sort of
The
looked at the
topics that you
guidelines that were
think.
shared.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just looked at the guidelines that were shared and sort of have
Mm-hmm.
responses around that on what Standard Chartered is doing
Okay. So
in
perhaps
the
if that's what we
diversity
could.
space.
Yeah. So perhaps if we could kick off with that, and if you could perhaps take us through some steps that Chartered have taken.
Okay, shall I go ahead?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, great. Okay. So at Standard Chartered, people matter, and that's one of the big things that we do look after and look out for. So diversity, which is encouraging different views and opinions and fostering constructive challenge, regardless of race, gender, grade, and all that underpins our purpose. Given our diverse stretch, and as you know, we are in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and we cannot truly drive commerce and diversity without fully embracing this diversity. So
Mm-hmm.
we do have an inclusive culture, which is central to enabling our diversity and driving performance. Essentially, no one in the bank should ever feel that they should be treated differently because of who they are or feel that their voices are not heard. We do have valid behaviors in the bank, of which our valid behaviors are dependent on each one of us being considered to be inclusive. We cannot understand and reflect the communities we operate in if we don't express tolerance, understanding, and listen to differing views. We can't. We've got to look at our um, geographical span and the people who are within this span and take care of that when we do a lot of our decisions and we make a lot of our decisions. So as we shape and enable our client-centric and adaptable organization, we focus on developing and deploying the right talents with enhanced skills and capability, leveraging our diversity so that we can deliver prosperous communities. So basically make everybody within our geographical span be prosperous. And to do that, then you then need that diversity across the organization to help make the right decisions. As an organization, it's our goal to become an employer of choice that is recognized for our inclusive nature, which maximizes on the diversity of thoughts and experience to empower people to make decisions that directly benefit our clients and their communities. So when we look at diversity or inclusion, it's all around enabling our various teams to unlock innovation, make better decisions, deliver our business strategy, live our values, and basically embody our brand promise, which is here for good, where good means a long time and doing good. And that's a bit of a nutshell of how we are structured as an organization and why we then think that this is important for us.
And how would you think that you when you think about the right people for the job or the right people for the organization, how do you go about sort of determining that?
Yeah, I mean, we'll obviously follow the normal HR processes, right? Where you look at somebody's qualifications and experience and so on. Um, but once you're in the organization, we also then make sure that you have the right training, right? So yes, we'll hire you because if you're looking for legal people, you will hire lawyers, obviously who are qualified. But then we'll have different training within the organization that then centers around a lot of the other things as well. So we do have a lot of programs which are more, um, maybe I'll call them soft skills, but that may be the wrong word. But around inclusion, around potential, realizing your potential, about inclusivity, and around all these other things that we look at. So it's not just about the fact that you're a lawyer and can argue a case in court, but you then do take into account everything else around the job that you do, right? So that you can then make sure you're using the right language when you're talking, making sure you're just not doing the wrong things and you're taking care of the different cultural elements in different areas. So we do have a lot of internal courses that we do have that help people with that. So yes, you get the lawyer, but now you will train the lawyer on other things as well.
And if we move away from sort of the jobs or the professions that need those formal qualifications, you know, like engineers or geologists or lawyers, when we think about having an inclusive organisation, do we look at just qualifications, or do we need to look at the person themselves and the organisation, how they fit together? Because when somebody does join an organisation, it's not just about they're right for the organization has to be right for them.
Yes, yes, we do. And one of the things that we do is reach out to colleges and universities as part of our recruitment. Now, if you're looking at, and I'll speak about disability, because we do want to have everybody in the organization. So we will work with organizations that center or do a lot more with disability and recruit from there as well. Because yes, you may not find that person in the normal university, but you do have somebody who's living with disability or somebody with disability who is affiliated with a certain organization. Yeah. And we will work with those organizations and we will recruit through those organizations, and we have recruited through those organizations. So we will do that as well. And when we're looking for the youth, we will work with the universities and do some of that, road shows and what have you, so that we can then recruit. One of the things we're also looking at, and this is from, I'll give an example from a race perspective. Previously, we were not recording what ethnicity somebody is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which then, if we want to change something within the organization, then it's not very easy for us to tell we have so many Africans or so many Asians in the organization, unless we then go out and ask how, and we ask people nicely to declare what ethnicity they are, and then we have a baseline, and then we can be targeted in our
Of course,
recruitments.
yes.
So there is an element of target outside of the normal, recruitment kind of scenario.
Thank you, Jane. I think that moves us on very nicely to Duduzi, because I know you want to talk about lived experience. So that would be quite helpful if we can maybe direct the conversation there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, and it's good to be here.
And lovely to
Yeah,
have you.
yeah. What I was going to share really was some of the work that I was involved in, after the George Floyd, tragic killing last year, and how we dealt with that, and how that manifested in tangible actions that we are implementing as a firm at EY. So just take through to the journey. So we hosted a number of listening calls with our black colleagues primarily, but not predominantly, and only them. We had other ethnicities, and indeed the white majority also listening in on those calls, and our colleagues shared kind of how racism manifests itself, how microaggressions manifests in the workplace on a day-to-day perspective. And we received a lot of feedback. We created necessarily a safe space. Kind of psychological safety is very important for people to actually then communicate very clearly and share exactly what they're feeling. And so we're able to do that, and we gathered a significant amount of feedback from our colleagues, just in terms of the experiences they've gone through, but actually more importantly we also got the suggestions of how things could be looked into and changed to create a more inclusive environment, not just for our black colleagues but actually for everyone within the firm. Because if we solve for our black colleagues, we're actually solving for everyone, and we become a more inclusive organization, and actually we're more impactful externally. And some of the reasons that Jane has already mentioned in a initial kind of brief. So we did all of that, and having collated a lot of that feedback, we effectively started off a catalyst of race conversations where people across the firm and different parts of the firm and different geographies were then more confident to actually share their personal stories and to effectively educate um, kind of others around what its life is like as a minority individual, and then for others to then empathize where appropriate, but then actually to then see what lessons can be changed to then move along that continuum to become anti-racist and not just not racist as it were, through the listen, learn, and lead model, which we applied more broadly across the organization. And having all these conversations going on and happening kind of organically within the firm, we did take more central actions across the central DNI and leadership teams to then create, if you like, a number of themes around actually what were the messages that were coming through. And unsurprisingly, role modeling or lack of role models, was a key theme. So we already had a strategy to increase, gender representation and um, race representation in the topmost level, which is our partner level in terms of our organizational construct. And we had metrics and targets, 40% gender, 20% in terms of the black and ethnic minorities. But we then went one further after that and put a specific target for black partner targets as well, because that again was something that was coming through. We need to look up and see that there are people like us in that leadership role, and we can aspire and believe we can actually achieve. So that was one example of some of the commitments we made. We made 7 commitments, and just rattling them through very quickly, we committed to disaggregate BAME, because we thought that it hides some of the differences between that group, and they're treated as homogeneous, but actually we needed to collate more data around the different components of BAME, and then see what interventions and changes need to be made for the different communities within that broad category. We said we would look across and do an end-to-end review of our talent processes, from recruitment, progression, promotion, and indeed exiting people from the firm, to see what changes need to be made to be more inclusive, and for people to have equitable experiences within the firm. And underneath all of these are real tangible actions that have come up, which are being implemented. And obviously we're a large scale organization with 20,000 odd people in the UK, so it's a lot of effort across many parts of the business. But those are some of the actions we said we would roll out broader kind of race fluency type training, which we've done. We said we'll disclose our black and ethnicity pay gap reporting, which we've done. It does tell a story that we expect it to tell, which is you don't have enough senior ethnic minorities at the top. So you'll see that the pay differential against our white counterparts is necessarily wide. And so all of that information has been laid bare, so to speak, and we're having to put initiatives to then address all of that. Having said we will disclosing is effectively one step. There's a next step after that. How do you close the gap, right? Those are actions that are ongoing, and these are multi-year change programs around culture to achieve the ambition of having a truly inclusive organization. Kind of just last couple of comments to make in terms of the commitments we made. We said we would work with our charity, which is the EY Foundation, to do a survey of barriers to entry for young Black people. That was done. The results were published earlier on in the summer, and on the back of that, there is a series of recommendations. And as a firm, we will lead on that, and one of which was, creating a CEO forum to, effectively understand what are the blockers to change in terms of Black equality. And then finally, we said we would look at kind of the barriers to entry into EY, right, and offer more opportunities for young Black people, and indeed more, ethnic minorities and disadvantaged background individuals into the firm. And there's some hard commitments on the back of that. All of that work is in progress. It's ongoing. It takes time to translate into how people actually feel. But I'm encouraged and positive around the progress we're making, based on what we've heard from our colleagues. Hopefully that's insightful and helpful, just in terms of journey and process and specifics around the commitments we made and what we're doing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I think what we'll do is we'll move on to Sarah, and then we've got some questions that I can bounce back to you. And then there's a few areas that I'd like to explore a little further. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you for joining us. It's lovely to have you here. So I think, following on from Duduzi's conversation, perhaps we can hear a little about what you're doing in this space.
Absolutely, and there's some really fantastic work done by EY and Standard Chartered, and I think
absolutely.
One thing that's really worth sharing with people is that Standard Chartered have put a lot of tools publicly that you can go and look at, and will help you in your journey in your organisation. So thanks, Jane, and everyone at Standard Chartered. And I'll try and build on what they've said and not go into the same things. Obviously, we've also done a lot of listening exercises. So we created a safe space for our Black colleagues. In fact, we've got another meeting tomorrow. We're still meeting to make sure that they're consulted and get to inform the strategy as it evolves. But really, I think the importance of a listening exercise is that leaders don't know what they don't know, and HR people as well. I'm sat in HR. I'm diversity and inclusion for EMEA, and so my experience when I was in the business was very different from when I moved into HR. And so you've got to go out and talk to people and figure out, what is life really like on the ground, and in what way is our structure and our systems not working for you? And the leaders don't always know that, and HR don't always know that. So one of the important things for us is bringing HR on the journey and digging into what about the systems and the processes that we've put in place is disadvantaging some groups. So for example, we talk a lot about own your own career, and we're all about empowering and innovation, and that works really well for a lot of people, and it creates a really great aspect of the culture. But culturally, for some people, they would never, they've been brought up to not ask for promotion, to expect to be recognized for the work that they've done. So you've got to think quite carefully about how to change those processes. And so we're going through a transformation with the HR team, and looking at how do we create equity? How do we build that into our system so that when we do a year in review, we've taken out the opportunity for bias to negatively impact it as much as possible? And as Duduzi said, that's a long process. You're really unwrapping things that have been in place, and most of them, let's be honest, like our leadership, what does good look like, was built around our leaders. And historically, all of our leaders tended to be white men. And so we've got to unpack that and think about how can we create a level playing field when people enter the organization. They're not coming from a level society playing field. So we're looking at how do we unpack that. But then in the interim, you can't expect the employees that are in your company to wait for those systems to change, and doing that properly takes a long time. So we're building in extra processes to try to create equity for our employees now. So one of the programs that I've been working on, and I'm probably the proudest of, is our sponsorship program. So we identified people who are from groups that are underrepresented in our senior leadership, and every single Black employee actually a company got a sponsor, because the number of Black employees is just so much lower than it should be, that we wanted to make sure that everyone had one-to-one support to unlock the career that they should be having in Macquarie. So we've really gone through assigning people a sponsor and making sure that through the sponsorship program they get the constructive feedback, which people are less likely to give people in a minority, particularly people from an ethnic minority, if you're not from an ethnic minority yourself. So we've put new processes in place there, and also opportunities. So a lot of the time, you can't get the top rating if you didn't get the project that enables you to get that top rating. So we tell the sponsors that we expect them to help people access opportunities. And it's been a really intensive process. We review the HR business partner reviews, and the leadership review these action plans that the sponsor and the sponsee created to make sure that they're enough. So it's intense, but it has to be. And it's also a really great opportunity to teach our leaders. If you sponsor a white man, he has different barriers than a woman or a black person. And so you've got to understand what those barriers are. What are the stereotypes that may be used? What does feedback look like when it's gender biased or race biased? And so you can challenge that. So lots of changing of leadership and giving them the tools to create equitable and inclusive workplaces. Yeah, so lots of work. Progress is being made, and we're just trying to keep the action going, keep people feeling the need for the action, and keep it on the agenda. You're just on mute, Naseem.
Just trying to make sure that I didn't disturb you when you were talking, and I suppose it's just making sure that the momentum is there and keeps going, and is and how do you deal with that? Because I think sometimes, we know in this space, and especially over the last perhaps sort of 18 to 24 months, diversity and inclusion, with a lot of what's happened, and the current climate, it's there. We know it's at the forefront. Every organization is talking about it. You can just have if you just look on the job market and how saturated it has become with D&I related job. How do you actually keep it alive and for people to be interested? So we can keep talking about it, but how do we keep people interested in it and understand that actually it's not something that's going to die off, and it's not the flavor of the month, it's not the flavor of the year almost, but this is sort of how you're going to be as an organization now, and for them to be part of that.
So I think for me, it's a lot about thinking, what are the brakes on the action? And you've talked about it. It was the flavor of the month, and so you've got to keep it going, and you've got to re-energize people, because they're like, oh, we've been talking about that. Is it not fixed? Have we not fixed systemic racism in the last 18 months? And so it's keeping going back, and keeping listening to employees, keeping understanding what is changing, what still needs to change. Keep having the conversation. So, we started by having a Black employee experience panel, and then we've just had an East and Southeast Asian employee experience panel to unpack the different ways that systemic bias exists for them. And then also we've built it into the structure. So our EMEA Management Committee is the accountable body for diversity and inclusion, and we've put in place a quarterly diversity and inclusion session of their management meeting, just focused on D&I, so that it's always on the agenda, tying it to year in review, making sure that it's something that they're expected to have, and kind of keeping the pressure on that way. But then I think one of the other really powerful breaks for us, and I'd really be interested to hear from Jane and Duduzi if it's the same for them, is this fear of the backlash. And we've had a lot of conversations, and I think a lot of people are very loud, that particularly white men, who believe that they're no longer going to get the job because they're obviously the best person for the job. It's going to go to somebody else, not because they're the best person for the job. And one of the conversations that we had with the leadership team was that there's another backlash, and it's a quieter backlash, and it's people who leave, and it tends to be people in minority. And so for us, we've very consciously decided that is the backlash that we really care about. That's really important, and so we have to be upfront and challenge people who say we're a meritocratic organisation. because actually a lot of studies show that the more you say you're a meritocratic organization, the more biased your decision making is, because you've said, oh, I'm meritocratic, so my gut of who fits in this company is who fits in this company. So we are changing the title to diversity, equity and inclusion, which sounds like a small change, but it really gives us the opportunity to talk about why equity is needed and why treating everybody the same isn't treating people fairly, and why meritocracy might in fact not be the case.
Thank you. And it would be really interesting to hear from both Jane and Duduzi about the backlash, because I think you're right, there is those two different sort of dynamics and layers to that backlash, because we over the last sort of 18 to 24 months we have been talking about BAME, and I'm with you, Duduzi. I think that masks a lot of the granular topics that we need to have a look at. But when we put people in boxes, and D&I has some specific boxes that have been created over the years, there's a certain cohort of people that don't fit into a box, and if they don't fit into the box, then they almost have this, well, then D&I isn't for me. This is not a conversation I need to get involved with, because I don't, I'm not Black, or I'm not a woman, or I don't identify as LGBTQ+. How do we keep the conversation alive for them? And what do you think, Jane and Duduzi, about that kind of backlash?
Thanks, Naseem. Sarah, you said something very interesting, which is probably something that we all need to think about. Instead of saying diversity and inclusion, we should now add equity in there, because yes, that does become important. To answer your question, Naseem, we will see, and we do see a lot of that backlash coming through. And one of the things that we're doing to sort of combat that backlash, and I'll speak specifically about what we're doing in technology and innovation and under our diversity and inclusion pillar, we have a program which we call ADITI, and what ADITI stands for is Ascending Diversity and Inclusion in T&I. And all we do here is, yes, we have a lot of conversations, but we have a lot of programs within that as well that will help address the challenges that we face and that we see. Typically, if I look at technology and innovation, and mainly because it's based in Singapore and the UK, is yes, you will have a lot of the senior people are white men, and we'll have the support team in India, and then we have the rest of the users all over the world, which may not necessarily resonate with what it is in the world today. So one of the things we've done, and thank God for technology or maybe COVID, is that because we are all working remotely today, you can have anybody sitting anywhere in the world providing support, at senior levels and at junior levels as well. So one of the things that we're doing specifically to try and address that is to have jobs that are advertised that would typically be advertised for a job in Bangalore is now a job reporting to somebody in Bangalore, but can be based anywhere in the world, which then helps change the diversity that we see in the teams. Same with some of the global roles. A lot of our global roles would be held by somebody sitting in Singapore or sitting in the UK, but now you can have that global role and sit in Nigeria, or sit in America, or sit in Kenya. And that's one of the big things that we're doing to address that kind of diversity gap. And yes, we have seen the backlash, Sarah, where people leave. When you feel you get to a certain point and you're not growing anymore, you leave the organization and go and benefit somebody else. And those are some of the things that we're trying to combat by having a program like this, where we stop losing talent by giving the talent opportunity. We have a fantastic program around unconscious bias. And then I think that's where a lot of these issues sort of stem from. And that's all about how to get you to understand that you have a bias and how to change your bias. And that as well is helping, because a lot of the times we don't think we have a bias. You tend to think that No, I'm not biased. But when you actually go through the program and you do some of the studies and the little cases that you have to do within that, you realize that yes, there is a bias. And then this will help you understand and acknowledge that you have a bias and do something about your bias. Because at the end of the day, we've got to remember where we are. I mean, we're in all these countries. We've got to reflect that we're in all these countries. It's not just about making a profit in these countries. So those are some of the things that we're doing across the bank, specifically in technology and innovation, but in other areas of the bank as well. So we do have. Of course, I know more about the technology one because that's where I sit. But literally every function has a diversity and inclusion team that is having the constant conversation, the constant engagement, and all leading towards change. Because at the end of the day, that is what we want to see is change, as well as being a profitable organization. Dudzi, over to you.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks for that. And just reflecting on the question and what we've been doing on our side. I mean, the issue of kind of call it fragility or white fragility when you tackle the racist piece is a real issue, and it is uncomfortable for the majority, and we spend time educating people through the lived experiences and the storytelling, to educate people how and why we needed to move into an anti-racist space, kind of purely on the race side of things. But more than that, we also spend time articulating the business case, which Jane so clearly put across as in her opening lines earlier, around actually when you get the diversity and inclusion right, everybody wins. It's not a zero-sum game, and that took a fair bit of time. We've made progress on that front. I mean, there are different individuals, different backgrounds. It takes time to get everybody on board, and it's always going to be something I think we'll have to continue to invest in, and conversation will continue. But what we are also doing is looking to build effectively allyship programs, and this is to role model kind of individuals from the majority. Be it from a gender side of things, you need the man to move the dial. From a race and ethnicity perspective, you need the white majority to role model and lead in terms of uplifting and bringing the underrepresented groups through. And so we're looking to drive those allyship programs at multiple levels. Partly is through the underrepresented groups kind of talent programs, or high performing talent programs, where we bring allies into those programs so that they are also educated, but also they also get to build relationships and get that sponsorship that Sarah was talking about earlier, through those programs. But actually, out of the DNI Central team, there's also just allyship programs where there's storytelling, role modeling. That goes a really long way. When people see stories, I mean, it moves the hearts, right? Because this is not just about heads. It's about moving hearts, and the stories are what move hearts. And we've got massive storytelling campaigns that go on through kind of regular newsletters. Yeah, you're on mute, Nassim.
I was just going to say, it becomes reality. It's not just a story somewhere you hear. It's actually there, and it's real, and it's being told by people that you see all the time or sit with, and that brings a different dynamic to your understanding of what that is.
Absolutely, and we know that tone from the top makes a difference, right? So if we're getting senior allies being visible in their support, sponsorship, allyship, and people are seeing that and believing that, it drives a behavioral change, because that's what we're really talking about here, is sort of behavioral change or cultural change. Sarah was talking about systemic issues embedded within systems, right? You need that tone from the top to uplift the organizations.
Perfect. So what I am conscious about is we do actually have some questions from those wonderful people who are listening to our conversation at the moment. So if I can just take you to one of our first questions is, what do you think, what's the panel's thoughts on how we move beyond the term BAME and why it does not work currently? Sarah, if we can start off with you.
I sometimes wonder if the government put so much panic into people of not using the term BAME because, it's uncomfortable to talk about. But, we in Macquarie, we've been very honest that, I think it was Duduzi that said everybody doesn't have the same issue. And if you're just talking about BAME, then you're flattening that. So, for example, within our Asian population broadly, we have the same population in the UK as is in the London hiring pool that we come from, but that's not the same for our Black employees. So it's really learning about what are the different issues and how do our systems affect different people and different groups differently. But I think one of the things that really struck me as fascinating about the panel when we did the tech check a week or two ago is that normally when we have this conversation, and even when we talk about the Black employee experience, we tend to talk about people from America and from Britain, and so I'd love to hear from the panelists, even if we're just talking about Black, how do we unpack the differences? It's not a monolithic population.
Jane?
Thanks. I was struggling with understanding what BAME is.
Black Asian minority.
I've seen that in the chat. I think it's different in some of the countries, because when you use the word Black cuts across so many different things, because Black in the UK, Black in the US, and Black in Africa is so different, and Black in Asia, in the Middle East. But that notwithstanding, I think it's a matter of thinking through the conversations that you have and how inclusive are they, and making sure that you're not locking one person out when you're talking about the other. Earlier, I mentioned about ethnicity, and one of the things that we're doing is seeking to know what our ethnic balance is within the organization, so that we can have an idea of what are the issues. You have to start somewhere. You need to know what your baseline is, and then you can get into what are the issues and what are the things we need to look at and how do we need to fix them. Yeah, because if you don't know, then you don't really know what you're fixing. So you have to be conscious of that. But because we're constantly having inclusive discussions and conversations, people are free to come up and say what they don't like, and they are listened to, and there are changes that are made. And I'll give an example. In the recent past, we have agile teams, and the initial word for the teams was tribe. And that word has been used for a couple of months now. And somebody came up and said, the tribe has a negative connotation, so we can't be talking about tribes. And because of that, a cross-functional, cross-cultural team was put together, and they looked through what the issues were and came up with another name. So now we don't use the word tribe anymore. We use the word hive. So it's about having a culture and a space that is open for people to say, I don't like this. I don't like the way I'm being treated. I feel I am being treated a certain way because of who I am. Yeah. And because of that, it then fosters a spirit of we can change and we can do something about it. And by having, and in that particular example that I showcase, it helps when, and that particular story was shared widely within the organization, that it makes people then also realize, oh yeah, I can actually say something and change happens. So having that constant conversation, that open conversation, that inclusive, allowing that space where you can say what the problems are and how we can fix them, and you actually see them getting fixed, then gives everybody else in the organization a space to be open and free. So that's what we've done as an organization. Of course, we still have a ways to go, especially if we're looking at the different ethnic groups, because right now we can say broadly, we have so many Black people, but Black is 3 different kinds of Black. Asian is different kind of Asian, because Asian from China and Asian from India is very different, right? So we're trying to break that down so that we can sort of know what we have in the organization.
Jane, it sounds to me like you don't just have a safe space. It's a brave space as well. So people, because it takes a lot for people to kind of stand up and say, actually, no. And if as an organization you're creating that kind of dual safe, brave space for that to happen, that's amazing. So yeah, absolutely well done to Standard Chartered for that. Did you see? Can we bring you in here and just get your perspective?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think our position on kind of the BAME acronym and grouping is clear. We've made that committed, as I mentioned earlier, on the anti-racism commitments. We've also looked at our network. So our network, which I'm the sponsoring partner for, actually disaggregates the communities, from a race perspective, to actually recognize differences, right? So we've got a Far East, a South Asian, a Black community, and a number of other communities, which is to try and create those spaces where we can recognize similarity and difference, and share stories, and the communities are actually open to everyone, because we see that as an opportunity for people to come together, learn about different cultures, and actually maybe also learn about some of the microaggressions that people experience within the organization, which the majority may be blind to across any of the communities. And that's really to try and effectively bring together a community where people can feel included, feel comfortable, but also form a lot of relationships. The reality of where we are in the UK at the moment is we're still sadly early on in the journey of inclusion from a race perspective. So the challenge Sarah poses around actually Black is got there's so many different groupings within Black, right, with different cultures and subcultures within that. I think we're still not yet there. We need to solve kind of the bigger picture, actually, which is just the visible representation point, and then develop and get there. I think it's a journey at this point in time.
Thank you for that. I've got a specific question for you, Jane, if I can just direct that to you. And it's how you talk about race in sort of East Africa. How does that show up? What does that conversation look like?
I'd say we probably don't speak about race as much as we speak about tribe, and this is the country cultural groupings, because the challenge then is different at a country level. And if I look at Kenya, for example, we have, I think, 5 tribes that are the majority of the population, and you will find then that those 5 tribes then have sort of perceptually everything. So what happens at a country level is then you see the conversations around the minority tribes, and how do we then increase that particular what's the word, tribal quotient in jobs, in schools, in everyday life, so to speak. So the conversation you'll find here, and now I'm not talking about at an organizational level, but at a country level, is around the tribes, and how then do we bring up the minority tribes so that we can see those people in representation as well. So in the organization, we also do look at that as well. So because what happens is there's a unconscious bias that's there. If, for example, I'm a Kikuyu, I come from the Kikuyu tribe, and the fear is that I would want to hire only Kikuyus. So in the past, there was always, and it happened a lot in the past, now not as much, but in the past, then you would have certain numbers based on organization numbers based on the tribe of the person, or if the hiring manager, the HR head is from this particular tribe, then you tended to see a lot more of that tribe getting jobs and so on. And those are the conversations that were happening in the past, and you see a lot of changes coming through now, and then mainly because of opening up the education space and making people conscious of the fact that you don't just hire people who speak like you, come from the same village as you. And those are the kinds of conversations then that you see happening. Not so much the black, white, Asian kind of mix. But with some of the organizations, you do tend to see some of that happening as well. But because I don't want to sound racist, I think I won't mention that here. But you do have certain concerns around certain cultures and their hiring practices within those cultures, within the organization. So you have the senior people from the same culture as the country or the person owning the organization, and then everybody else is Kenyan or Ugandan or Tanzanian. So that has become a bit of an issue, and you do see a lot of stories popping up in the press around that. But from a Standard Chartered perspective, it's about who is capable of doing the job, and how you get in. So we then don't look at the cultural nuances that come through.
Thank you. I'm on mute again. Oh no, I'm not. Perfect. Thank you. I think that, to be honest, I think that would resonate with all of us. So I think, you know, although the kind of the issues that you've got in terms of, you know, the tribal issues, I think obviously are quite focused around where you are. I think if you think about hiring people like yourself or the unconscious bias, I think that resonates with every organization, and I think in every country that you know you can go to, I think there's some element of that. I've got another question that I would like to direct to the panel, and please, I'm happy for anyone to start us off. Do you think that hard diversity targets are needed to move the needle when it comes to achieving racial equality? Racial equity?
Well, let me kick off as one working in an accounting firm. Look, I think generally what gets measured gets done. It focuses the mind. So I think that is helpful. There's always a danger with numbers, right? The backlash conversation earlier on, it can be seen almost as an affirmative action type approach where you're fitting a quota system. But I'm from the school of thought that if you put some numbers out there that you are aiming at, you tend to drive change. Otherwise, you're stabbing in the dark, and you may end up nowhere.
Perfect.
I think I agree with the Duduzi on that, because if you don't have the numbers, chances are things are not going to change. So it does help move that needle because you are working towards something. But if you don't, then you have the unconscious bias that is there. I think Sarah mentioned it earlier when she talked about the white man heading the big organization. And if there's no numbers in that organization, chances are that is how it will look for life. But if you put in some kinds of targets, then things start to change. Now, of course, change is painful, but things do change, and it opens up for everyone else. So that it's no longer about affirmative action, but getting other people who can equally do the job and equally do it well. So we have to start with numbers, or else not much changes, unfortunately.
Sarah?
So I agree. I also know a lot of people working in organizations where targets are just a no. So I think you don't just have to look at output targets, you can also look at input targets. So if people are always allowed to get away with having a panel of white men, and that's who they look at every time they hire a role, well, then obviously you're going to hire a white man. So you can focus on things that aren't the big number. So you don't have to have public targets to create change, but targets absolutely do focus the mind and push people towards it. But then I think you also have to have the difficult conversations around what does good look like, and is it what we've always said good looks like, and you've got to kill cultural fit. I think that's probably the most important thing you can do, is to say that there is a Macquarie person or an EY person, and there's this one style. And then to go back to Deduzi, you know, and actually, sorry, Jane, it's going to be better for the organisation. You've got to focus on more than just the numbers, otherwise you end up fueling a backlash. I could probably talk for hours on that topic, so I'm trying to be succinct. I'm not sure I'm making sense.
No, but I think you're right. I think we need to have a hybrid approach. So I agree with all of you. I think we do need to think about targets, because we've had gender targets for a long time. So why can't we have, you know, targets in the race space? But I do also think there's, you know, we've got different issues to look at. So we need to think about, and it's the targets that you set have to be thought about and well thought out, and not just input as well. So thank you. I'm thankful for the panel on that. So we're coming to the end, and I just feel like this hour has flown, and we could just continue this conversation for another hour. But one of the things I'd ask each one of you is to perhaps leave our delegates with, you know, a thought around, you know, something that they can ponder on, and think about a question or a reflection or something that you're thinking about within your organizations, just for something that they can take away. Because I think one of the things that, you know, we all talk about intention, but I'd like our delegates to take something away to think about and action maybe once they all go back to their own organizations. So I'm going to ask Duduzi to start us off with just something, a thought, a question, a reflection that our delegates can take away.
Yeah, sure. If I may, I'll cheat and maybe say two things.
Absolutely fine.
So there'll be those that are in authority or positions of authority or seniority within the organizations that are listening. I think if you can sponsor somebody that is different from you, and stake your career capital on that person and lift them up, that will be something incredibly powerful to do, because it will have a massive multiplier effect in terms of what that will do for that individual and their community more broadly. So that will probably be my one ask of those that are in authority. I think the second thing I would say is to those that are underrepresented, be it race, be it gender, or other protected diversity characteristic, I would say, you know, be brave, be courageous, and stand up. For too often people are silent, and therefore change doesn't happen when people are silent. So standing up and challenging the status quo is important. The term that's coming up is called upstanding rather than bystanding. So if we have more upstanders, that will be powerful and helpful.
Thank you. That's very powerful. Sarah?
How do I follow that?
I know.
I think, you know, that what he said, but
Yeah.
I think, you know, everybody has more power than they think they do. And particularly when I talk to people in middle management, and I see it in myself, the more senior you get, you tend not to sort of realize that actually you do have more power and more of a leadership shadow. So, you know, being upstanding will throw that shadow and give other people permission to do it. So I think the question I will leave people is something that I've been pondering as I've prepped for this event. Where are your brakes? And they change and they grow. So where are your brakes? What's currently putting a brake on you and your organization making progress? But I guess also look at, even with those brakes, where have you come? I think sometimes we focus a lot on how much there is left to do, and there is so much, but it really helps to keep fueling you for the fight, to look at how much you've come already, and then sponsor somebody.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. And Jane, if we've got a few minutes, so if you could.
Sure, thanks. One of the things, the one challenge that I would give the people who are listening is that change starts with you. It's not anybody else who's going to do anything. It is you. And the one thing that I'd like you to walk away from this discussion is, what am I going to do when I go back to my work or to my desk? I would like you to go back, look around you, look at your team. How diverse is your team? If your team is very diverse, fantastic. If your team isn't, what are you going to do about it? Yeah, going back to what Duduzi said, lift that one person up that you think can change or will be the change, or another 2 or 3 or whatever. But do something. Go back and do something, because change does start with you and not anybody else.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Really wise words. And I suppose I'm going to leave our delegates with a thought as well. You know, have a think about, everyone has intentions. So everyone, I don't believe that anybody has bad intentions. I think everyone has good intentions. How do we translate those good intentions into actions? Because actually it's when we action things that change happens. So, you know, perhaps we can all think about what's the one thing that we can action that will propel the change to happen in our organization. And it doesn't have to be something, you know, gigantic, massive, big. It's following on from what Jane was saying. It could be something small, but it is with you. And if we can do that and we can have that mindset, you know, that sort of inclusion is the everyday behavior. It's not an add-on. It is the everyday behavior, and how we can instill that into our organizations and help us move forward. Because I do believe, and again, please panel, do come in here. Diversity isn't the difficult thing. You can have diversity in an organization. We can go out there and purposefully recruit, you know, diverse people, but actually having an inclusive organization is the key here. Because once you have an inclusive organization, when you bring the diversity in, it stays. If you don't have an inclusive organization, the diversity will come in, but it won't stay because it's not somewhere where they want to be. So going back to what you were saying earlier, Sarah, it's that silent majority that then just leave.
Yeah, I think I've heard somebody put it differently and say inclusion is a choice.
Yeah, it is. Thank you very much today, panel. You've been absolutely amazing. Thoroughly enjoyed hosting and listening to your experiences and your, you know, what you're doing in all your organizations. Really great to have different perspectives, you know, apart from the UK, Jane. So really thankful for that. And, you know, I look forward to hearing and seeing what you all do within your respective organizations in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.